Good evening and welcome to Education Revolution Through Business. Some of us have been connected on social media, but we actually get to speak to for the first time face to face ish right now. Graciela, I have known forever. Jose, I've known on Facebook for a chunk of time. Lorena and I have known each other our whole lives. And Patrick is the newcomer to my network and to my circle of peeps. So, welcome everyone. For those that don't know who I am Francesca Scotto. I am a business coach, startup coach as a passion, but my background is in engineering. I started my career with General Electric, managing basically accounts for utility companies. It's probably one of the most boring things I ever did with my life. So I left that real quick. Then I started my first venture, writing software to track the performance of aircraft engines. And since then, I have done everything you can think of, from like your Mary Kay lady to owning a fitness franchise, which has not served me well. um, and then I've continued to really have a passion for helping other people build amazing products and solutions to problems that impact the world. I figured, the funnest thing I could do is start something. I love starting enterprises, but I can only live one lifetime and I can only start so many. So I figured I'm going to help people start things. So that's one thing. And then the other part of that is I really want to make an impact. I want to be able to solve world problems. And once again, I'm only one, but I figure the best way I could do that and have the biggest impact is by helping others who are doing great work amplify the impact of their work. So that's why I have a passion for working with entrepreneurs, and love looking at opportunities and segments and industries where entrepreneurship can really make a difference. I work with Black and Brown founders, if you guys are familiar with them. I also work with the Alapata Collaborative out in Miami. BBF is an organization dedicated to helping Black and Brown folk not ground, but launch businesses with minor or little resources. We really focus on bootstrapping. And then we have at the Alapata CDC, we are focusing on fighting gentrification in a primarily Dominican neighborhood in Miami. And we do that by helping businesses grow and stay in the neighborhood through real estate acquisition. So that's just a little bit of me and how I got here. I've met you guys throughout my journey, and you're either a friend of a friend or something like that. So, welcome and thank you so much to each of you for being here. I'd like to give a chance for each of you to also do an intro so that the audience understands who you are, and how you got to be an entrepreneur yourself. So, Patrick, let's go with you first.
Let's get it. My name is Patrick. I am a middle school humanities teacher right outside of Detroit, Michigan. And 3 years ago, me and who is now my best friend, we literally said that we wanted to document our entire school year via podcast, and we did that. Right inside of my closet. So I definitely heard you earlier when someone said that. And we talked about our real experiences as teachers, and it resonated with an audience, and it grew organically. And then I went overseas and I was like, I really love creating audio content.
Hmm.
And from there, I founded Good Trouble Media. And so our purpose is simple, is just to tell and support other people in telling the real stories that people within and maybe right outside of global education systems. And so currently the Common Sense podcast is still up. We also are a producer for Be Loud Radio, which supports a group of young people who contributes audio content to a local radio station in New Orleans. And then I also support other new podcasters who are creating content in education. So I'm excited to be here with all of you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for joining. Jose?
Hello, everyone. My name is Jose Wilson, and I've been a veteran educator for the better part of 16 years, 15 years in the classroom, middle school math teacher in Washington Heights. Shout outs to Washington Heights. And then
Woo woo.
I've also been any number of things: speaker, father, executive director of EduColor, an organization dedicated to race and social justice issues, as well as this, just a bunch of different things. Author of This Is Not a Test, board member of a bunch of different organizations out there, but just generally an overactive tweeter and hyper responsive for no reason. But I'm thankful to be here. Thanks for having me.
Oh yeah, thank you so much. Yes, I know that the tweet happy thing that happens. Yeah. Graciela.
I love how short your introductions are. So let me respond in kind. So I'm Graciela Tiscareño Sato, coming to you from my badly lit garden, but I had to get outside after being inside all day. So I'm a daughter of Mexican immigrants. I grew up in Colorado. I was born about a quarter mile north of the border in El Paso, Texas. And I moved from Northern Colorado to University of California, Berkeley on an Air Force ROTC 4-year scholarship. So I attended Cal on a 4-year scholarship. Thank you, Air Force. And then halfway through school, I found out that I could go fly. I thought I was going to go do some engineering, but they said, hey, this is the Air Force. If you want to fly, go fly. Got some mentoring, served in the Air Force as a KC-135 aircraft navigator. So my office was a flying gas station. And after 9.5 years of service and finishing my master's, I decided to get out, work in global marketing back here in Silicon Valley. So I worked in telecom, I worked in solar electronics, always high tech marketing. So I went into basically STEM marketing. And then when the global dive happened in about 10 years ago, the summer of 2009, that was my chance to start my educational publishing company, Gracefully Global Group. LLC. So we just celebrated 10 years in business in the fall. And I decided that I wanted to create a publishing company that would tell the stories from the Latino community that we don't see. And so our titles include Latinovating, Green American Jobs, and Latinos Creating Them. Uh, Case studies of green economy entrepreneurs. And then the first ever bilingual children's picture books inspired by my military aviation service. So the Captain Mama book series, we're working on the third one now. First books were Mama Flies the Jet in English and Spanish. And then I also serve my military veteran community with personal branding, content courses, and our last book that we just launched a couple months ago was Brand Before Your Resume. So I'm a storyteller, and I help veterans become epic storytellers of their own value for their next career. And we publish all the books and the courses and the live presentations to that end, work with a lot of school districts.
All right, awesome. Thank you. So I want the listeners to realize the very different paths that people take to get to A, entrepreneurship, but B, to the solutions they want to focus on. And so we'll discuss a little bit more about that as we're going through the conversation. But the first question I have for you guys is, how is your organization making an impact? And we'll start with Jose.
Well, thank you. It's interesting because with EduColor, we've had several waves and iterations, but generally we've just been trying to do the thing about teacher leadership and race and culture. And so trying to figure out a way to get these intersections going has been difficult for so many different people. And we found that if we just focus in on any number of educators, we can develop and assure and amplify the voices of educators who often needed to be at the policy tables, who needed to be in the spaces that of influence. And so, using the model that I had already kind of created for myself, I said, what's the best way to make sure that, this work becomes a legacy? And so in that way, I tried to make EduColor a sort of like a reflection of what I was doing, in that I was trying to get even folks who aren't in the organization. I was like, if we can find ways to amplify them, and Patrick knows this because, that's the homie, right? Like, understanding that we could actually replicate a really beautiful thing and make sure that many folks can feel this energy of like educators of color who are often pushed to the side when it comes to all these different reforms. We said, okay, we can do so much better by just getting these folks in the very spaces that they can have really impactful influence, because otherwise you get a lot of mediocre folks out there who aren't really about that. And we know what that's like too, having to combat the situation where you're like that we could do so much better than that. But if we just listen to the folks of color who are actually really doing the real powerful work on the ground, with the kids in the communities, that we could do so much better when it comes to this narrative.
So I want to backtrack one step, and I want to talk about impact first, because as I'm hearing you speak, I think one of the issues we struggle with in our communities, and I see this happening in nonprofit work as well, is the definition of impact. What is impact, right? And how do we even quantify it?
Mhm.
In my many trips around the sun, one of the things that I've been able to do is sit in and do like pitch competition judging and startup venture judging for either grants or different things. And
Mhm.
social impact is at the core of the work that I do. So sometimes I've seen applications that are like, this is a social impact venture. And what we're building is an app to help wealthy people get their kids into expensive kindergarten. And so I'm like, I mean, it is impacting somebody and they live in our
Yeah.
society. So is it social impact? And does it really even qualify? So I
Yeah.
think part of what you're getting at, Jose, and what I'm after with this question is this concept of how are we defining who needs the help and what the problems are that should be solved.
Mhm.
One of my big things with technology in general, which applies here, is that whoever chooses the problem to be solved leads the technical revolution. In
Yeah.
this case, they lead
Mhm.
education revolution. When you define
Mhm.
the problem and you say the problem is this, and
Mhm.
you actually go about solving that problem, you are leading. You are, in
Yeah.
essence, directing where things are going to go. So that's my
Mhm.
whole thing with impact. So if you want to
Yeah.
change your answer, I'll come back to you. But I think Graciela is jumping out of her seat right now. So can you add
Yeah.
to that, Graciela?
Yeah, it's what you said. It's like, what is the problem that you are solving, and who are you trying to help, right? So
Mm-hmm.
I want to answer this: what impact we're having. I actually just brought it up. I went to the Captain Mama website to look at teacher testimonials because I get goosebumps with remembering this. Um, right after we launched the first book, I got invited to do a Veterans Day school assembly at a Title I school here in the Bay Area. And the counselor who invited me, who's become a dear friend, Adi Briscoe, he said, "Can you do the assembly in Spanish?
Mm.
Because 78% of our population is, English language learners." And I said, "Well, of course." So I got to do a Veterans Day assembly to celebrate our veterans in the USA, but completamente en español, right?
Mm.
Because my books that tell my service story are in both languages. So at the very end of that, this little girl came up to me as they were leaving and she pulled down my sleeve and she said, "Capitana Mama, yo
Ah.
también quiero volar aviones como tú," which means, "Captain Mama, I want to fly the airplanes like you do." And so she's like 5 and she speaks Spanish. And so I'm thinking, well, that was me. That was the kindergarten student that I was. I was this English language learner. And now she has this idea that she wants to fly airplanes, right?
Mm.
So that idea of showing up and putting an idea in a child's mind based on literature brought in your own language to give you an idea of a career that you've never considered until this moment, that's the kind of impact that I like to have through the literature and through the speaking. And a couple years later, I went back and did a third grade career day at the same school, and AD wrote this testimonial. He said, "Graciela, we were inspired by your story. Several of our girls mentioned to me that they want to graduate from college and fly for the US Air Force. Thank you so much."
Ah.
Okay? So my impact that I want to have, and this is on the student side, right, is to have them imagine, what's possible because someone's in your classroom telling you how they did it, and they sound like your family, and they're speaking your language, and they're opening up your imagination. That's the kind of classroom impact I want to have. And then the other part is we do Spanish language workshops for parents at school districts, and I call that La Vista de Largo Plazo, because I know that when that little girl goes home and says, "Mommy, Mommy, I want to fly airplanes," that if her mother is anything like my mother, she's going to say, "Estás loca, you're crazy. That's not for girls," or "That's right."
Right.
And so I go after the cultural stuff, the gender specific stuff by doing workshops for parents called La Vista de Largo Plazo, the long term view. And then I tell a different side of the story of what it's like to prepare your child to go become who they can become. and see who they can become, and to let go of that fear that we have in our communities. We want to keep our girls and our boys so close to home and smother them and not let them find out who they can be. So I also then go and teach the parents how to think long term and let the
Mhm.
parents, let the children go. And then I keynote at teacher conferences to celebrate dual language programs and bilingualism, telling again yet a different part of the story through the literature. And then they take the books back in their classrooms. So the little girl sees the books and then we start over again. So
Mhm.
I'm going after all of it, impacting parents, educators, and children with the work that we do.
So, um, for those that are joining now or that might not be familiar with Graciela, I'll add some to your story. One of the cool things about Graciela, she is married to I'm gonna kill it, Japanese.
Mhm. Yep.
Yes, okay. Because for a second I'm like, she's Korean, but no, Japanese.
Oh, you got it.
Her kids have both Spanish and Japanese names. Like this is a
Mhm.
truly bicultural home, which I think is so
Mhm.
cool.
Mhm.
And you've been very intentional about maintaining as much of the both cultures as possible. And I know that's been tough. But I think also
Mhm.
it's important to know that education has been an integral part of your family life because
Yeah.
you have a special needs kid who is
Mhm.
brilliant and fantastic. And you guys have had to advocate for your kids. You've had to really figure out education
Yeah.
more so than parents who didn't have to advocate for their children that way. So I think that
Oh
a
my
lot of
God.
what you've been
Yes.
able to do has been a labor of love, but also a product of your own experience. So we'll come back to that in a second when we
Mhm.
talk
Yeah.
about what schools need. So definitely, I want to hear your input on that. Patrick, talk
Yeah.
to me about impacts.
It's funny. I feel that when I first started the podcast, that I was deeply concerned with people not necessarily understanding the real experiences of teachers, primarily because teachers were not telling their own stories.
Mm,
And I feel like when we first started, there was sort of this growing movement of teachers using Instagram and Twitter to kind of document what was happening in their classrooms and to give like a real sort of view of their day to day. And so we decided to tackle that in a way that was a little bit more structured and a little bit more authentic to sort of who we were as people. And what Jose said about replication really stuck with me because I think that's where the kind of the business aspect came to me. Um, we knew that what made the podcast popular was the fact that it was simple, was the fact that it was relatable, right, or real, and the simple fact that it was able to attract an audience with innovation, right. And
mm,
I said that part can be replicated, right? And so from there, um, being able to talk to teachers about how to replicate those factors when they tell their own stories in their own podcasts has been a way in which we have um, kind of created impact within this business that sort of I'm running out of my green bedroom, right? In addition, now kind of translating that to kids and doing more producing work, I realized like, okay, like I thought that when I first started this, that it was going to be like me kind of creating a bunch of shows, but I'm realizing now that I'm really enjoying kind of being a producer and sort of creating shows for other people to do so that they can tell their own stories. And I think kind of measuring that impact from those bare bones really has been really awesome to see over time.
awesome. Awesome. Jose, did you want to add something to impact after my little shake up on the question?
I see. So I think one of the biggest problems that we see in America today is the lack of teachers of color across the country. Generally speaking, we understand that even though educators of color are probably recruited at the best possible percentage that they have, since it was recorded in the 1980s. We're also losing teachers of color at the fastest rate that's ever been recorded, way faster than their white counterparts. And so what we recognized too was a grand opportunity to do some things that didn't just allow for the retention, but also like didn't just allow for the recruitment, but also the retention of educators of color. That includes the community building that we consistently do from a digital perspective. We understand that the EduColor hashtag doesn't just work as a monthly chat on Twitter. It's also worked as a 24/7 resource for anybody who's interested in these issues, including journalists and any number of publications and organizations. So that's been really great to see. And there have been times we've come up against the NBA draft and we're number 2. That's been powerful to see. But then we also decided to really build that up and try to make more local hubs. So we've been able to collaborate, for example, with the Center for American Progress on the We Build EDU project that highlights stories from, I guess, a qualitative standpoint, allows for folks to tell their own stories during the pandemic. We've collaborated with the Stacey Abrams movie, All In for Voting. So, Julia Torres, who's also, part of the EduColor squad, shout outs to her, was able to collaborate, get us together so we can get teachers to actually have civic conversations with their students through the movie. And of course, we have any number of projects, including the EduColor NYC collective. That's going to be the more local work, trying to
Yeah.
take the culture responsive sustaining education work that was boosted by now almost former Chancellor Richard Carranza and try to boost that up. So we made the definition. Now it's time to do the work and put it into schools. And we've done that with very little funding, just small donations and membership. And our community is ever growing and it's going to become international at some point.
Yeah, I bet. I bet. I love that. I love that because I think one of the things we can forget is that education as a tool is a global experience, right? Every country educates and invests in some sort of infrastructure for education, whether they do it well or not, or if they can get better at it and whatnot. And I think that we are in this country, even people of color, um, are in a position of privilege. I was doing a separate chat at another moment, and the way I phrased it is geography matters, right? And so being geographically in a country that is so powerful, where we have access to resources, if you have food, if you have a job, and if you have roof over your head, you're in the top 5% in the world. So we are truly in a position of privilege to make an impact, not only locally, and that is enough problems here, right? I'm not even suggesting you have to go global, but those people that feel inspired and called to do work abroad as well, the world is real big. There's 4 billion people living in $5 or less right now. And so they are the ones that are needing education the most. And creativity in education delivery is huge in those spaces. Um, okay, so thank you for that, everyone. I want to move on to the next question for me, which is, and this is something people always ask when they're starting. I person. All right, that baby was super cute. Okay. One of the things that is important when you're starting is to have the courage to do something that either hasn't been done before or that you haven't done before. So people come to me, well, how do I know I'm ready? And how do I know that I have what it takes? And how do I know? It's like, well, you don't. You just do it. But it's oversimplistic. So I want to hear from you guys, for each of you, what was the hardest thing for you about doing something from scratch that either you hadn't done before or had not been done before?
Or both.
Or both. So go ahead, Graciela.
I have a feeling that we're all going to say it was both. um, so I started this journey because of my daughter, like you mentioned earlier. When the layoff happened in the summer of 2009, the very first thing I did is I sent a press release that I've been sitting on to our local TV station because we had just created a DVD called Letting Your Child's Wild Side Out. That was the story of how we raised Milagro from the time that she could move around the house as a blind baby to now. I think she was about 7 years old. And so it's a story for parents and special education educators of how we learned to not overprotect and just kind of let her become her own person, fall flat on her face and decide her own limitations, and all the literature that I was reading about disabled adults and how they wish they had been raised. So that was like really so what happened is I just got laid off from my Silicon Valley job in the middle of a recession. What can I do? I'm like, well, I've already been doing this other work, so why don't I actually go do that? And then I was really surprised, Francesca, that KGO TV in San Francisco called me back right away. I said, we'd love to meet your family and see about this new DVD and how you're educating people to raise their children with special needs. And so I realized, well, okay, that worked. Like if they don't call me back, they don't call me back. But I realized the advocacy, the lessons, the things that we were learning as a couple about how to raise a child that doesn't see. Keep in mind, before she was born, I was flying airplanes at the Air Force. So I was never involved with anybody that couldn't see. So this is all new. But it was that the media outreach, the storytelling, the trying to connect with teachers who I didn't know, because I had a child in school, but I wasn't trying to attract them as customers. I was just working with teachers as parents do. So all of it was new, right? And the hardest thing about it was just to sit down and organize, where do you start? How do you start the outreach? What's the message? And then when we did the first book, it was a different set of people. And how do I reach middle school teachers? So to your point, you just start. And then you learn from the thing that was suddenly magically successful. And then you learn from the email campaign that nobody responds to. And then you just keep on learning. So I think that's the key. And then with every product launch and everything that we've done, it's the same. I'm like, well, that worked, or that didn't work. And then you build on it. And then you have something else to teach other entrepreneurs who are doing the same thing. So that's what I would say. The hardest thing was just, building the community and figuring out how to organize and, that marketing plan. Even though I'm a marketing professional, like starting over again with resetting the marketing plan and how I'm going to go forward. That's always the hardest thing.
Yeah, I'll come back to that thought. Jose?
There's something to be said about having conviction and belief in the things that you're trying to do. Too often, you think that you're supposed to know everything as when you try something and everybody says, oh, that's an overnight success. It's like, you have no idea how many nights I've gone over not thinking about this thing. I witnessed any number of people who, they may have a dream, they may have an idea, but then they forget the part about actually going to they have to go study, like actually
Mhm.
gotta go get a sense of what everybody else is doing. And you don't have to replicate everything that everybody's doing. You just have to be attuned to what folks are doing and then try to figure out, okay, where do I fit in when all is said and done? Because I think too often, like you get into this space like, oh, I don't have 100,000 followers, so I can't do this thing, there's just no way. Or I don't have X, Y, and Z person sponsoring me. And it's like, just get started. Like, see what you can do and then build from there. Like I tell my people all the time, for example, like my mom is an influencer because like I have I have a lot of
He
different
influences
followers.
you.
But you know what that's like
Uh-huh.
when it comes to Dominican moms, right? Like I think I have a lot of people who follow me and all that other stuff, and I might put out a thought and it may or may not get received well. But my mom has like maybe 200, 300 people, but they all want to read what she updates on. So she gets an influence, she gets an audience, and I'm like,
Yeah.
she's convinced about the thing that she has to put up. So I'm like, wow. So that's all you got to do. And I think our moms like have a thing about that where they don't care about having a huge audience. They just care that the audience they do have is going to hear what they have to say. So I think that's a good lesson for so many of us who we have no idea whether or not like our thing is gonna go blow up, go viral. You may have that one thing that goes viral and the rest of your content does nothing. But then
Yeah.
have that consistent relationship, that consistent
Mhm.
drive and passion to continue going, I think is something that I've had to consistently learn and bring people in who can also do the same thing.
The no filter mom. Yeah, my mom's the same way. I hear you. No filter.
Yeah. Yeah. Patrick.
So
Starting something new.
I really feel like for me, I really struggled with um, this idea of like capitalism and
Mm,
providing us like what I felt was just a social good slash necessity, right? Like I don't if I'm helping teachers who are just like me in the same position that I'm in, teaching the same standards, right? Like to kids, like and you want to start a podcast or you want to get know what I did to get this amount of listens or whatever, like do I really want to charge you for that, right? Like that to me was a kind of an internal struggle. And I understand like what the national data says about teacher pay. I understand kind of the need, right, that I'm trying to kind of solve. And so I just kind of struggle with what does a funding structure or a profit structure look like for me,
mm,
um, that like aligns with my values, but then also like compensates me for my time also, because as a teacher and as me, somebody who juggles way too many things, right, like
mm-hmm.
I just don't have a lot of time. So if I'm gonna dedicate this, like I probably should get something out of it, because like thank you so much, like it feels really good. um but but this rent though, right?
Right.
So I think that that is something that I've struggled with internally, um,
Mm.
as I've started something new.
Yeah, no, thank you for sharing that. That was very honest. And I think that especially when we get close to nonprofit, because see, this is the thing with education, there's private and there's public, right? Um, People who go into teaching are typically, and I'm making big strokes here, big generalizations, but when people go into teaching, they know they're going into the public school system. They know they're going into a government sponsored institution. And there's already a mindset, like a resignation to, I'm going to be broke. And so the minute they're in a position to make money, it feels either disingenuous or like I'm somehow betraying my oath to I don't know, poverty or something. And I know not everybody's poor, and being a teacher does not make you broke. That's not what I'm insinuating. I'm talking about a relationship with money. And so definitely guaranteed, Patrick, you're not the only entrepreneur. And I want to then step out of that and say it's not only teachers. I work with entrepreneurs all over, and nobody starts charging what they're worth, and nobody starts pricing their product or their service thinking of a market uh, position. They start thinking of like, what do I feel comfortable charging? And one of the things that is so cool about starting your own business and doing your own ish is that you get to decide what your pricing model is and where you feel like integrity meets fairness, right? And so you get to craft those spaces and you get to work with people one on one. I am notorious for giving people payment plans, negotiating exchanges, bartering services, and things of that sort, because sometimes it's more important for me to grow together than to make $500, right? And so it all depends. When you are creating your own enterprise, you get to set the rules. Not only do you choose the problem, right, and direct the revolution by choosing what you're going to work on, but you get to create the kind of corporation or entity that models the kind of world you want to live in. You want to hire people of color? Go ahead. You want a black CEO? Be it. Right? You want to give people paternity leave? Do it. So you get to call the shots when you create an enterprise. The second thing I want to say, because I think it touches on all of this, right? Some of the questions people ask about starting something new. When do I leave my job? Bruh, simmer down. You have to leave nothing. You stay employed because that's your angel investor, and you continue to grow your business. You can do both. Nothing says that you have to leave one to do the other. I love and careers. I am a painter and an engineer. I am a writer and a speaker. I am, a teacher and I don't know, a construction worker in the summers. Like ants are beautiful. And there is nothing in the manual of life that says you have to do the one thing and not the other. Okay. I am at a point where I've been painting like crazy because of COVID, and people are not like, you should be painting for sale. I'm like, hadn't thought about it, but maybe that's business number three. I'm okay. Let's see. Right. So there is nothing, there are no limitations. Starting something new requires simply that you do the next thing. It's just the next thing. And I think you guys know that. Like the first step to the podcast was probably figuring out what platform or like which software. And then you downloaded that thing. And then it was like, what is the first topic I'm going to do? And then you do that one episode. You can still quit after that. But then you show up and do it one more time. And now you have two shows under your belt. The next thing you know, a year went by and you're like, how did I get here? I just showed up and I did the next thing. So that's me sharing my story about how you do something new that hasn't been done. And obviously, I can share a lot more stories about being a 21-year-old Latina in 1997 before tech startup was a thing, writing software and you know building a tech startup. I learned a whole lot, bro. It like crashed and burned, and it was great. A lot that I know now from that experience. But absolutely, it's about doing the next thing, and you focus on the one thing. People will tell me, "How do I raise capital?" You don't even have a business. You ain't raising nothing. Simmer down. Do the next thing, okay? And then you build up, and then we'll see where it goes from there. Okay. Next question. Um, what is something that, in your experience, either as a consumer of education or as a participant in the system, as a teacher, what is one thing that the private industry can do better than the public school system? And we'll start with you, Patrick.
Yeah, so I actually spoke to an ed tech company yesterday, and I told them, I said that they have the opportunity to move faster than we do,
Mm,
right? There's a lot of bureaucracy on this side of the table, okay? There's a lot of folks, a lot of people who want their head, patted, and a lot of folks who want, to be fist bumped and sign things and a-okay and all those things, right? Ed tech companies have an opportunity to innovate and scale and quickly, right? Like it takes us time to do that.
mhm,
And so, what they can do truly, which I don't even think that they know, is that they truly can help to destroy systems that harm kids. Um,
mm,
Instead of profiting off of and enabling systems that hurt kids, right? Like, for example, standardized testing is something that I think about often. And I know as a teacher, and I'm sure you all as well, right? How harmful standardized testing practices can be on children, particularly children who look like us. Um, and ed tech companies will drop platforms that prepare students for tests, right? As opposed to using the billions of dollars that they make on the back of us to create and push us to do something different. And
mm,
so, um, what can they do better than us, right? I think that they can innovate, obviously, and they can use the billions of dollars that they do have from us to actually push us to do something more innovative on this side.
hmm. I love that. I'm gonna have to like journal about that because I think there's so much meat there. Jose, what would you say?
I think following up on what Patrick said, yeah, there's something to be said for being being able to be intentional about the thing that you design and do it in a new and innovative way. I think is really critical. So I do think about the conversation around charter schools, for example. And yes, like there are charter schools that in fact do harm in many different ways. And there are practices which I think charter schools can do better, especially around things like the diversification of teaching profession, in terms of pedagogy, in terms of being more accessible to parents. I think those are things that are worth pulling out and really teasing out. So, for instance, like when it comes to educators of color, I think about how often the certification tests often push away of some of our best and brightest talents from the own communities where they serve. So a lot of the folks who are educators of color will go to the charter school because they don't necessarily require that test. They just require you to be able to teach kids, which I think is a way, is a disposition that is hard to come by in the
Mm,
in our public school system currently. So not to say that, of course, I am all in for the public good, and it can be more responsive to issues of race, class, gender, and disability. So in the ways that we could be more innovative that way, then I'm all for it.
mm, mm. Awesome. Thank you. Gabriela? Graciela? Sorry. I've only known you like
So
10
I'm
years.
just. Are we going to tell the tostones story at some time?
Ah,
the grilled tostones.
yes.
So I'm thinking about your question, and I'm thinking about the challenge that you know independent publishing companies like mine, or speakers of color who create a program. I know a lot of people are like, well, I've created it. How do I get into the school system? Right. I'm
Mm-hmm,
thinking
mm-hmm,
about your question in the context of there's things that we can do, we can invent, we can innovate, like has been said, but it will only have the impact when we find the partners in the school districts that want to bring us in and hear from us. So I'm going to answer the question saying it this way: what we can do as creators, innovators from our communities that the regular, standardized curriculum cannot do is we inspire. We
mm,
inspire children. Okay. And here's what I mean. I'll pick an example. Let me think. Fourth grade teacher friend of mine, Ziwa. She's teaching fourth grade. She's going to teach narratives. And I think it was values, ideas, and beliefs. And that's why people write books. So she was teaching this fourth grade standard about why people write. She brought me in to do an author visit in her classroom. And she took that question in her curriculum and she posed it to the students after they heard from me, heard my story, why I write the books. And so then their entire writing that they did wasn't based on some thing that they read already that was assigned to them of why do authors write, what are the beliefs, values and ideas. That it was based on somebody they just met,
mm,
right? And could engage in a conversation as an author in their fourth grade classroom to really ask those questions of the author straight up. And so then the lesson becomes an inspirational lesson where they learn so much more than the standard thing that you're being given to teach. So what we're able to do is inspire kids. That's where I live. Like Nina Vaca, if you know her,
yeah.
okay, she said, Graciela, you are in the business of inspiration. That's what you do. With everything you do, you're inspiring. And when you're being measured as a teacher on, you got to teach these things, these standards that we're going to test, where's the room for inspiration? I hope you found some, because otherwise your kids are just bored. And then they're like, oh, I hate writing. Another example, third graders in Kansas City, Missouri. I did this February last year, right before the pandemic was declared. The teacher had me in her classroom and she says, please come to my classroom. My kids already think writing is a chore. Please come in here as an author and teach them that it's not a chore. So I came up with an exercise where the kids imagined they were an animal and gave voice to the animal and wrote a little story, like a point of view. I taught them about, point of view, that you can write from someone else's point of view. And I said, these books that I write, it's a 7-year-old boy talking, but am I a 7-year-old boy? No. Well, how do I do that? And so we're able to do this exercise where they became an animal that they know. And oh my God, the things these kids wrote once they gave voice to an animal, like a turtle in a park, the only brontosaurus that survived. I mean, they got so creative. They were like dying to come up and read their writing in front of the school. And this teacher was like, oh my God, I had no idea they're going to be so excited to read their writing. So long answer, but what we can do is inspire the kids in a unique way that isn't happening by standardized curriculum stuff that you have to teach.
Mm,
So then the challenge becomes, how do we get those inspirational people, that content creatives, literature, whatever, into the classrooms to inspire, when, as Patrick said, there's layers and layers and layers of bureaucracy to get through to be able to serve. And it comes back to the business question, the marketing question, where to start. But that's what we can do, but only if, again, we find the right partners.
Hmm. So I'm hearing there's sort of a trend in all of y'all's answers, starting with your you can be nimble and agile outside of the public school infrastructure. You can move at your speed. I loved how Patrick phrased it, and I don't remember your exact words, but you were saying we can from the outside destroy. I'm all about impacting words. So I'll take destroy because I think sometimes in order to rebuild, you have to kind of level the field and, remove the rubble and start over. And I don't know exactly what needs to be destroyed, right? That's not my job as the coach. I think that you all know what needs to change and what are those systems and kingdoms within the public school infrastructure that need to be destroyed. But once you do that, it is something that I've talked to Lorena about, and when we've done coaching for the work that she's doing with multicultural classroom and the workbooks and whatnot. It's like, well, Lorena, it is one thing to be anti-racist. I want to know what you are for, right? So there is a time and a place to destroy, and then there's a place to create. There's a time when you have to then be the solution, so not only to eradicate, but to rebuild and to bring forth and to be able to envision that future. I think that when you put those two together, and I hear you, Graciela, when you say inspiring, because part of what we're trying to do through business is to be ahead of, right? And it's to lead people to that future that we see, which is your point, Jose. You were saying earlier about conviction. Like if you can see that future that you're trying to create, and you can get people from here to there, right? When you're in the system is going to move at its own pace, and it's going to be like, and it's Trump that's president, and now it's Biden, and there's like, the mammoth is moving so slowly, but we are able to, from the outside, either push the envelope faster, and sometimes we can take education there. I see what Disrupt Text has done, for example, from the outside to influence. And I would say it's quite remarkable what they're able to do, and what they have been able to promote and push forward as far as agendas and people really wanting to make those changes. And so there are definitely ways. And for those that are interested in starting businesses or have an idea, like this is the time. There is never a better time. If you really believe that there is a future that you can help create, then this is a good time to start taking steps in that direction. It's a good time to inspire people to follow and to get there with you. I don't think we'll have time for all 5 questions I had in mind, but I'll move to the last one. This is not exclusively for people of color. Education, entrepreneurship is open to anybody that wants to improve the system, that believes in our kids, and that believes in what education does for a country, for an economy, for our future, all of that. I do have a special interest in y'all's perspective on what is it that people of color, and I want to say like BIPOC, the letters are getting longer, and anyhow, parentheses, because I was thinking about this today as I was preparing for this. I'm like, am I going to say BIPOC? Am I going to say POC? I'm like, how about when we talk about whites, we talk about them as non-colored, and everybody else is just people. That seems so much easier for me. But anyhow, that's a whole other conversation. Okay, so how do we get black and brown and red and yellows to lead in this revolution, to be more involved in the private movement to revolutionize education? Um, Patrick.
Yeah, well, I was gonna say, well, I think that's a hard question to say, um, because we're tired, right? There's a lot that we have endured, you know, today, let me tell you about this week, child. This week has been crazy. This year, right? Like, and I think that in some cases there are a lot of teachers, a lot of Black teachers, right, who are just like, man, I really wish that my school would just treat me right, right? My
Mm.
district would just treat me right. So I don't
Mm-hmm.
have to do nothing else, right? Like I can literally give my heart and soul to this building the way in which the teachers that I had who stayed
Mm-hmm.
in 30 years did, right? And so I think you, but with the introduction of social media, right, like there's also this like push and wave that's like, no, you can actually do multiple things, and here's how, right? And so I think that there's also that new sort of introduction there. And so I think there has to just be like a mindset shift that allows people to reflect on what does entrepreneurship look like for you, which is I think
Mm-hmm.
what you talked about earlier, right? Like it does not look like for homegirl down the street the same way that it might look like for you, right? Like you might not spend 20 hours on your side hustle, right? Or you might only do it seasonal, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like I truly want to open a haunted house one day, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to do it all year round, but every October I might want to come by and scare some folks, right? Like
Right,
so,
right.
thinking of having folks to dream bigger about, you know, exploding their wildest dreams without the pressure of having to do what everybody else is doing is a conversation that I think folks can have.
I'm
So
just
would you
taking
mind
notes.
repeating the question? Yeah, would you mind repeating the
Sure.
question? Because I just felt my brain go 1,000 miles an hour when I heard the question. I want to be able to focus it before
Okay.
providing an answer because it's such a heavy question. And just yeah, just
How do we get black, brown, yellow, red, and I'm going to say people
mhm.
and educators specifically? How do we get them to lead this education revolution from the private sector?
Okay. So I'm going to say it this way because it applies, from the private sector and it also applies inside. So I'm going to say it this way. In the fall of 2014, uh, Education Week published an article that informed the country that as of the fall of 2014, kids from all the communities you just listed, non-Caucasian, were now the majority minority in our nation's classrooms. That was almost 7 years ago. So, what I'm going to say is our communities need to stop thinking of ourselves as minorities. We need to start seeing that we're not the minorities, we're the majority minority, and we need to start taking positions of power. I'll point to California, okay? In California, we have Latinas running for school board and winning. We have them running for mayor and winning. We have decided in California, because we've known for a long time that we are not the minority. It's this language of minority that keeps trying to push us down so that we feel like we're powerless and we're in the minority, but we're not. We're literally the majority of the country. And in some states, actually the physical absolute majority. But we have been told that we're the minority. We keep using this word, minority community, minority community, minority. And so we have to stop that and say that as entrepreneurs, as business leaders, we need to run the Chamber of Commerce. We need to, be on the school board, all the places that are making the decisions that we want to dismantle. Well, we need to get in there and dismantle them. But we need to stop thinking of ourselves as the minority and run for office and be in those places where we can make those decisions. I think that's a really important part, whether you're in a system or, as a private sector business owner. I'm sick and tired of hearing that we're minorities because we're not.
Hmm. Thank you for that. And I will come back to that. Jose?
I think it goes back to something that Piri Tomas once told a bunch of us who were in the audience, I want to say 20 years ago. I don't use the word minority because there's nothing minor about me. And
Mm.
so too often, when we keep using these sort of words, it stays in the frame of what we consider to be whiteness, right? Because that's why it's hard to use words like BIPOC, because then it's like, okay, let's just stick with people of color because that keeps it simple and it doesn't center whiteness. And so when we think about what it means to be in this country and the years and centuries of institutional oppression, and how difficult it is to like break those systems that keep leadership models the same way. I find that the best ways to elevate any number of leaders of color is to reframe what it means to actually be a leader. What are we looking for when we value folks, and how are we uplifting those values to assure that that leadership comes to the fore? Some of our most powerful leaders aren't leading from the front, for example. They may be leading side by side. Like, how powerful is that kind of image? Or even leading from the back. Like, I know as a teacher, for example, there are
Mm.
times when I found that if we're on a trip, I like standing in the back and letting my kids go forward, because that way I can be more observant about everything that's happening in front of me. And I think there's so many leaders who want to be that person who, you know, on the one end, they don't want to be in the front, but they just want to be able to see it all. I think that's important. I think
Mm.
also, too, when it comes to the values that we espouse, we need to go and interrogate the cultures that we're in and actually see
Mm.
what the assets are within our specific cultures. This idea that, like, for example, that our languages are, you know, are less than English, for example, or that we're flipping between English and Spanish, as like that's not a good thing. We
Right.
could create spaces where, in fact, like when we do, like, let's say me and you are having a conversation in Spanish and somebody else only speaks English, like they're not gonna get offended for us just speaking Spanish to one another. Like that shouldn't be a thing. But
Mm-hmm.
that comes with values, that comes with morals and ethics, and understanding that yes, we can recreate a situation where we don't want to recreate, or we can create something totally new where, you know, leadership doesn't have to look like the same old, same old. It could look like something different. It could be a little warmer, more empathetic,
Mm.
more understanding, more embracing. And then people who actually want to go into communities and actually have conversations with people who, you know, are the community leaders, the folks who aren't necessarily visible, but everybody knows them. Like those
Mm.
are values that I think so many of our own communities of color actually embrace. But until those become parts of places that aren't like common, like private, you know, the private sector unfortunately does have a stereotype of like being very cold and corporate, right? But some of the most powerful models I've seen in the private sector, in fact, lean on those values of community centered, going to have the conversation, reframing leadership, understanding that even with this like capitalist framework, we can do so much more if we know how to share and share alike, because everybody loves that idea of sharing. And then making sure that nobody goes hungry is a really powerful framework
Mm.
how to discuss this private, I guess, private entrepreneurship, as it were.
I asked the question, and I should have started with this was because now I want to say 100 things. um, so much to say. I'm gonna start with um, EduBiz. If you are watching this and you are thinking, you know, I really need to get going on this idea that I've had and I've been sitting on, EduBiz Intensive is starting March 8th. It's coming up real soon. So I invite you to join us. It'll be just 3 weeks to get you started to do the next thing. So we'll share more via Twitter. You can reach out to me. Patrick is joining us as well. And I know Lorena has information. So if you're watching and you're interested, let us know. We can point you in the right direction. Now, aside from that, I do want to say that, and it has to do with money, and it has to do with capitalism, and it has to do with the systems and all of that. I have to address it. I want people to understand someone is making money today doing the wrong ish. Okay. So, this idea that somehow you're being super altruistic and you are not going to take the money and you're going to do it for the love of the children or whatever, some dude came up with some idea that we all know sucks, right? Went and got $2 million to go do it. And so, my question to every person out there that thinks they have the right solution for the right problem is, are you really going to let that money go to someone else who is not going to do jack for our communities and for the real problems that need to be solved? And so I think at some point we need to shift our thinking and realize that there is power in money. There is power, and I'm not saying it solves all the problems. We know that that is not where I'm going. I'm saying the money is going to someone else today. And so, unless more of us start owning the problem and saying, I know the problem and I have a solution, the money will continue to go elsewhere. The money's not disappearing. Capitalism is not going away tomorrow. I wish it was, right? That's a whole other seminar. That's a whole other project that we would undertake. But between now and then, how are we going to advocate for ourselves, not just through protesting? And I'm all for let's go burn some buildings, okay? I am not arguing against that. I understand there's a place for destruction, like I was saying. There is a place for destruction. I'm saying, and then what? Right? And then what? And so I want to invite people, and you can see I get super passionate about it because I truly believe that entrepreneurship is the strongest form of activism. It is the purest form of revolt because this is when you get to flip the finger and say, I'm going to do it my way. And there's a whole song about that. Okay. Entrepreneurship, like you were saying, Jose, is the opportunity for us to create and to say, I am no longer going to do it that way. I am going to do it this other way. And yeah, it's an experiment and it might fail, but I think there's a lot more courage and opportunity in trying and figuring it out and actually putting the stuff out there. And the money is out there. Someone else is making it. So let's go get our piece of the pie so that we can actually advocate for those solutions that we really believe in and we can put out there. I don't want to keep people too much longer. I feel like the conversation just got good.
Can I add one little thing?
Yes,
just a little,
please.
Okay. So I mentioned earlier, we celebrated 10 years in business. Okay. We've been funded 3 times, microloan and then now SBA back loans, like we've done the capital at the right time thing. So absolutely the money's there for good ideas. And when you show traction and you show a track record, but I would never have been able to get us to this point if I held on to those lessons of money and how I was raised as a Latina daughter of immigrants and scarcity and money is bad and my Catholicism and all those things that we have, right? So absolutely, I'm so glad you said that. But the money's there. What I said about power and the mindset in the minority, this is what I mean. It's like some other guys are already getting the money, right? The work I'm doing with veterans right now, I'm going after a federal agency that's been funding the same consulting firms with the same curriculum since 1977 of how people get out of the military with the same bad advice. Okay, the contracts are huge. And I'm getting in there showing how we're doing it and all the proof of veterans that we've trained so that I can get some of that federal money so that veterans can get out like it's 2021, right? Like do personal branding. So, but I'm not afraid to go in there and butt heads and go into the databases and go into the meetings of these federal agencies and say, this is why your curriculum's outdated, right? And so I'm going in there because I have the mindset that is not good enough. And I have the mindset that I can't stand. There's probably some guy in a basement in Georgia going, I'm still collecting on that money from that thing I sold to the DOL, And so he's still making the money. And it really irritates me that those people are still getting paid for stuff that isn't serving our veterans. Same exact parallel with what we're talking about here.
Right.
But you have to understand that you have to go take it and you have to go in there and get it because they're not going to let it go. And you guys know you're in the system, right? Like school districts have a lot of self-preservation forces at work. And we didn't even get to talk about the advocacy with my daughter and what I've had to do. But if I learned anything raising that kid, it's nobody wants to do anything more than they absolutely have to do. And when you demand they do more at the administration level, you're going to get so much pushback and you're going to get so much hate. I mean, the things they did, right, to try to make me go away, because everybody wants to self-preserve. So that's what I'm saying. We have to stop thinking of ourselves as a minority, go in there and take the power everywhere that we can, because that's what it takes. You have to take it. And that's what I want to say about that.
I want to leave us with a thought. And with that, we'll end today. But I feel like I need to do 3 more of these with different tangents that we touched on. But I want to leave everybody with this thought. What if you didn't teach for money because your money came from somewhere else? And I'll just leave it there because I know that's a whole other workshop. But I just want to put that thought out there because I think we sometimes get it the other way around. We're so caught up in having to teach for money that we're really not that altruistic. We won't rock the system. We won't challenge people. We'll put up with BS because our paycheck is coming from there. So as much as we're thinking that we're not about money, it is actually the money that's keeping us in an oppressed state of mind. So it was a thought, but I feel like it's a whole other workshop, and maybe we can uh, touch on that one next time around. It has been my pleasure. Thank you, thank you, thank you for jumping in and diving into this topic with me. And again, EduBiz Intensive, we start March 8th. I'd love to see a bunch of people wanting to change the world they live in. So high five, and I'll see you guys soon.